There are calls for former Prime Minister Scott Morrison to step down from Parliament over the Robodebt scandal. Departmental secretaries will provide further updates to the government today about next steps and whether all sections will remain sealed. I spoke to Government Services Minister Bill Shorten a short time ago on this. Thanks for joining us. I might ask whether the government has given any more consideration to releasing the sealed section of this Royal Commission report into Robodebt.
The Royal Commissioner proposed a sealed section so as not to prejudice any potential prosecutions to the various referral bodies. We'll get an update later today from the public service heads about steps they will be taking over the course of the day. So at this stage, no change. I do understand that on one hand, people, and probably including myself up to the receipt of the Commission, would have thought we wanted to hear some of the actual names of people. But I also respect the Royal Commission's logic that she feels it's better for the proper handling of these matters to be by investigatory bodies that we, in fact, there was in fact a sealed section.
So is the government going to work or get advice on releasing that section, or will that remain sealed for the foreseeable future?
I think the sealed section remains sealed. That was the Royal Commissioner's direction. But I also know that people want to know what are next steps, and I'll be receiving an update later today. All
right, so that sounds like some senior public servants are going to lose their jobs today. I don't want to preempt it. Well, I do want to preempt it, but that's what you're indicating, isn't it?
I can't say that. No, I can't say that. I don't know. I think it'd be wrong of me just to speculate, full stop.
What do you make of Peter Dutton's comments in relation to this?
Peter Dutton, as opposition leader, never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Like, the guy hasn't got the memo. He says that Labor is politicising this issue. I mean, his team didn't want me to do the class action. They called it a stunt. Well, 6 months later, the biggest ever settlement in Australian class action history shows it wasn't a stunt. And when we said there should be a Royal Commission in opposition, they just said it was just a witch hunt and there was nothing to see there. 670 pages later, plus appendices, there was a lot to see there. So now Mr Dutton says it's all about politics. I say this to you, Mr Peter Dutton. Politics is when you unlawfully go after the poor. Politics is when, for 4.5 years, you pretend there's nothing wrong with what you're doing and you keep ignoring the victims, the advocates and the complaints. Politics is when you decide that people on welfare can be treated to a lower standard than other Australians. That's politics.
We've had denials that from Alan Tudge, Christian Porter and Stuart Robert that they're named as having the potential for criminal or civil action against them. What about Scott Morrison?
Well, I think his omission of denial is pretty interesting. I think you're onto something. I don't know. I mean, Mr Morrison, I think, is in denial about the severity of what's happened. He was Social Security Minister when this unlawful idea passed through Cabinet. He was Treasurer when they were trying to collect money unlawfully from hundreds of thousands of people. And he was Prime Minister while the scheme was underway. So as for the rest of the cabal of embarrassed and disgraced ministers, they mightn't have been referred to a criminal agency or other civil agencies, but their reputation's in tatters, let's be blunt. If you read about what they did, the Commissioner says about Mr Porter that, he should have drawn different conclusions. It says about Mr Robert that being a Cabinet Minister didn't give him the right to, tell falsehoods to the people. And as for Mr Tudge, the Commission says that he abused his power. So I don't know how these guys think that somehow that's not an entry you'd want in your Wikipedia about your life in politics, is it, Andrew?
Should Scott Morrison resign from Parliament?
Well, I'm no fan of his, so I'm not sure that my view would be, I guess you'd have to take my view with a grain of salt. That's up to him. But again, what the Royal Commission says about him is humiliating and embarrassing. Now, to be fair, he totally says it's all wrong. The problem is that if you read that whole Royal Commission and you read all of the things that are said, you got one bloke saying it's all wrong and everyone else saying that Robodebt was all wrong. I mean, how does Mr Morrison really exculpate himself? He was the Social Services Minister when the most shameful chapter in the public administration of social security and law in Australian history was launched. He was the Treasurer promising in successive budgets that there was this mountain of gold which had been taken inappropriately by people on welfare, which was non-existent. And then as Prime Minister, he used to say, oh, well, we're just doing what the previous governments did. And the Royal Commission says that's a complete falsehood. So I don't know. Obviously, what he sees in the mirror is different to what other people see.
There seems a pattern now of Royal Commissions into past governments' misdeeds, with each new federal government holding one. The Abbott government had the Pink Bats Royal Commission, for example, which again examined government actions leading to people dying. Does it take some of the momentum or the integrity off the perception of these things, that there is a perception there's an element of political square-up or political advantage in calling these things?
You can read and write, Andrew. You just read the Royal Commission report. We didn't invent Robodebt. Labor didn't ask for them to do it. In fact, repeatedly we asked for them to stop it. We didn't ask Mr Morrison to take an unlawful idea to the Coalition Cabinet. We didn't ask the Coalition Cabinet to embrace an unlawful idea. We didn't ask them for 4.5 years to ignore all the red flags, the advocates, the harm. We didn't ask them to pay Price Waterhouse for a report that they never got, the final version. We didn't ask them to ignore the advice that there was a warning that 95% of the debts could be inaccurate. We didn't ask them to oppose nearly 20,000 internal appeals by people who received robodebts. We didn't ask them to not reappoint Terry Carney at the AAT after he had blown the whistle on Robodebt. We didn't ask them to oppose 4,339 external AAT matters. This is not another day at the office. The Dutch government, when they got their social security laws wrong in the way they were applying it to a smaller group of people in the Netherlands, resigned. This government would just have you think that there's not very much to see here. And, you know, they're all... I mean, what is the coalition defence? The ministers just were too stupid to know what was going on.
Paul Keating's comments on Anthony Albanese's visit to NATO, what do you make of those?
I'm pleased that Prime Minister Albanese is attending NATO. He's been invited. We should take an interest in the world. I think it's important that NATO realises that other freedom-loving countries around the world are equally opposed to the illegal Russian war against Ukraine. And so I think it's very timely to show Australia's support for a democratic nation being illegally invaded by Putin and the renaissance of Russian imperialism and fascism.
Now, Claire O'Neill's a friend of yours in the caucus, but she made a blue over this Donald Trump Jr. tweet, didn't she, the other day?
I think Claire is fabulous. I think she's an outstanding minister and she's doing great work fixing up the mess left to us in immigration and her portfolio of home affairs. I have to say, I remember in 2016, Malcolm Turnbull said that it was the end of the world when I uttered words on Darwin FM radio. I said that some of Donald Trump Sr.'s views were barking mad, and that apparently made me unfit for office, according to Mr Turnbull. Well, I think President Trump's views, some of them have turned out to be incredibly extreme. So I'm not about to get into the I don't pretend I live in a glass house. I'm not going to throw rocks at any colleagues.
How are you feeling about the Fadden by-election on the weekend?
Oh, I think the LNP will win it. I think if Stuart Robert was their candidate, I think then there could be an upset. But he, of course, has left town, ridden out on his horse. I think I just assume the LNP will be ahead. But Letitia Del Fabro, our candidate, nurse educator, she, the voters of Fadden would be, they'd be doing a lot better than the previous LNP chap they had by voting for her. But I think there might be a bit of ingrained LNP, just whatever. And I also think that Stuart Roberts' departure has probably made it slightly easy for the LNP to hold that seat.
Just finally, a question on NDIS. You suggested last week it was not the end of the world if the government didn't meet its cap in growth of 8%. Do you stand by that comment?
Yeah, I should have picked my words more carefully. It's a target, not a cap, but the government's completely committed to reforming the scheme, and I believe our reforms, which put participants first, will deliver a reduction in growth to about 8%.
Bill Shorten, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Lovely to chat.